All right. Friends, please turn in your scriptures to Acts chapter 7. We're going to go from Acts chapter 7 into Acts chapter 8. We're going to take a detour along the way, so I just want you to mark with your finger, or however you want to, Acts chapter 7. And then please go back to Psalm 139. Psalm 139. Now, while you're going back to Psalm 139, I want to re-summarize what we've talked about previously. And believe it or not, this relates back to the doctrine of God, this parentheses that we've been in for several weeks. I don't know if you remember, but I said several weeks ago, what did I say? I said, behold, the goodness of God. And then what did I say? Behold, the severity of God. Why do I keep doing that? Why do I keep marking the severity of God and linking it with the goodness of God? Is that what theologians typically do when they talk about God's goodness? Well, there's some important reasons why I do that. The first reason that I explained earlier is that it's a tendency for modern, non-believing, nominal Christians to only emphasize the goodness of God. Oh, when something happens to me that I consider to be good, that's God's goodness. Friends, that's not the biblical view of God's goodness. What is God's goodness? God's goodness is God's objective goodness. What did Job say? Though he take me out for Dairy Queen, yet will I worship him. Pastor Bruce, is that what it says? No, it says, though he slay me, yet will I worship him. Friends, I'm not looking for evil from God's hand to me. And I say evil meaning in my perspective. That's the whole point of studying this. The doctrine of God. The goodness of God can be the severity of God from our perspective and for a time. Okay, why do you keep harping on that? Well, what have we been through in Acts chapter 7? What are we coming up to? Acts chapter 8. Well, we've been through what? The martyrdom of Stephen. Stephen is murdered for the faith. Friends, say it with me. Behold, the goodness of God.
Goodness of God.
Behold, the severity of God. Why was Stephen murdered? He did everything, quote unquote, right. He was a faithful proclaimer of the gospel. Remember how we talked about he believed the scriptures? That the leaders of the temple didn't believe. Why then was he punished? Why was he murdered? Friends? It's a great question. Now this is where we go on our parentheses, inside of our parentheses. Back in Psalm 139. And I want to open Psalm 139 to investigate the circumstances of Stephen's demise, and then what? What happens to the church after this? Do the church officials go out, gather all the Christians up, take them to Dairy Queen for a nice Happy Meal, and follow it up with a soft-serve ice cream cone for dessert? Is that what happens? I don't think so. Thank you, Mrs. T. Most people in our culture today are familiar with either the books from Tolkien or the movies, the Lord of the Rings movies. So most people have either read the books or enjoyed the movies. In that work, The Lord of the Rings, it's a tale of two brothers, Boromir and Faramir. Boromir is the elder. He's stronger, he's faster, he's better. He works out at the gym more. He's a man's man, this Boromir. Faramir is a little softer. Now, he's not effeminate. He's not completely unlike his brother, but he is not as strong as his brother. In all of those ways that Boromir is strong. And yet, you go through the War of the Ring. What happens? Boromir is killed, while Faramir lives. Faramir lives through the War of the Ring. And then what happens after the War of the Ring? He marries his princess. And they start a family. Now, if someone would have come to Professor Tolkien and said, Professor Tolkien, in your world, why did Boromir die? Why did Faramir live? You might wonder, what's the professor going to say? Well, friends, let's look in Psalm 139. Verse 1, O Lord, you have examined my heart. You know everything about me. You know when I sit down or stand up. You know my thoughts, even when I'm far away. You see me when I travel and when I rest at home. You know everything I do. You know what I'm going to say even before I say it, Lord. You go before me and you follow me. That's an interesting one. You go before me and you follow me. You place your hand of blessing on my head. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too great for me to understand. Friends, go to verse 16 in that psalm. Psalm 139, verse 16. You saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. Friends, what's Professor Tolkien's answer to the question? Why does Boromir live? Why does Boromir die? And why does Faramir live? What does Professor Tolkien say? That's how I wrote the book! What's your recourse against that? Oh, Professor Tolkien, you didn't write your book well. Friends, that's how he wrote the book. Friends, can I push us one more step further? Why is Stephen's faithfulness rewarded by his martyrdom and death? Well, say it with me. Because that's how God wrote the book. Let's go back now. Back into Acts. Back up to Acts chapter 8. God is the author of history, friends, and if you don't accept that, if you don't see that, then you're going to miss. You're going to miss the fact. What did Job say? Though he slay me, yet will I worship. What did Stephen do? He testified faithfully. And what was the response? In Stephen's case, it was his death. Why? Because that's how God wrote the book. Friends, is that how I would run a universe if I were God? And if I were writing the book?
Probably not.
Guess what, friends? Even if I would not run the universe like God would, is that an indictment of God? No, friends. So Stephen is dead. We go to Acts chapter 8, verse 1. What's coming up next? Saul was one of the witnesses, and he agreed completely with the killing of Stephen. Now here it comes, friends. God is writing the book. A great wave of persecution began that day, sweeping over the church in Jerusalem. And all the believers, except the apostles, were scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria.
Praise God.
All the believers, except the apostles, were scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria. What did Jesus have to say about this? Unless a grain fall into the ground and die, it will not bring forth more grain. Yet, if the grain falls into the ground, into the soil, and what? And dies, it will bring forth a new plant that will have a harvest of what? 30-fold, 60-fold, 100-fold. Friends, what has God just done to the regions of Judea and Samaria? He's scattered the grain. Remember, Jesus said, wait here until I send the Spirit. The Spirit comes on the day of Pentecost. Now what? Now what? Now Stephen testifies, and he is martyred. And all of that concentration that God had done, concentrating the entire church in that first community in Jerusalem. And now what has God done with the death of Stephen and the persecution of the church? He's taken the grain of that church and what? Scattered it into the fields of Judea and Samaria. Behold the goodness of God. Behold the severity of God. Friends, why did Stephen have to die? By the way, I hope you realize that I don't say this flippantly. But I say it, as Pastor Bruce talked about, with fear and trembling. When we look into the things of God, and we see how he does what he does, it's a marvel to us. It astonishes us. Now, at the same time, Let's continue on. Verse 3. Saul was going everywhere to destroy the church. He went from house to house, dragging out both men and women to throw them into prison. So Saul is part of the active process of the scattering of the faithful. Is Saul an enemy of the church? Yes. Is Saul a servant of God doing God's work? Friends? Yes. Can you make sense of how to bring A together with B?
Not in this one.
I'm not sure that I can, but is it important? Is it important that I connect all the dots in order to understand? Or can I just receive the fact that God is writing the book? By the way, who in recent decades, who went from house to house dragging out people to then take them somewhere to be destroyed? Who does that sound like?
Germans, the Holocaust.
Do you look, I'm not calling Paul a member of that German party. What I'm saying, friends, is the same kind of spirit that animated his wicked scattering. And it was wicked, right?
Yes.
Even though Saul, who's later to be Paul, is doing God's will. Look, Saul is doing God's will in the scattering as a force of evil. And he's going to do God's will when he then, later in his life, what? Is used by God to write more than half of the New Testament. Say it with me, friends. Behold the goodness of God. Behold the severity of God. So who is Saul like at this stage of life? He's consumed by ideology, and that ideology has done what to him? It has stimulated a hatred in him. What did Pastor Bruce just preach about with the law? Why was the law given? Was the law given to stimulate us to good works? Well, yes, it was, if it had been possible that we could be so stimulated. But what was the problem that Pastor Bruce pointed out? The law revealed the sin nature that was inside of us. And that sin nature would what? Would it cooperate with the law? Not willingly. That sin nature would not. And so what do we see in Saul? We see in Saul a religious man. Studied the law of God. And it led him to be a killer, to be a murderer at this stage. Behold the goodness of God. Behold the severity of God. Okay, now, God has concentrated his believers. And now, just as suddenly, boom, he's scattered them. Just as a farmer scatters seed. Now, what does it look like at the time of scattering? How is it that a concentrated church gets dispersed into new places and starts to spring up new plants that are going to yield this godly harvest? I'm glad you asked, friends. Go to verse 4. But the believers who were scattered preached the good news about Jesus wherever they went. Friends, I say this trembling. If God should scatter us, what will be our response? Do we stay at home and say, oh no, Woe is me, I've been scattered. This is bad. Stephen's dead, and now this Saul guy and these other people are hunting to kill us. I better stay home. I better sit this one out, Pastor Bruce. Look, Pastor Bruce, I want to do the right thing, but you got to admit, circumstantially, it would be better to sit this one out. Is that what the early church did? No. It says this. The believers who were scattered preached the good news about Jesus wherever they went. Verse 5, Philip, for example. Now we go from Stephen to the evangelist, Philip. Philip, for example, went to the city of Samaria and told the people there about the Messiah. By the way, how do you get into a pulpit like this? You may be watching and say, wow, I love listening to Pastor Bruce. I sure like listening to Pastor Brock. How can I get in on that? Friends, the first thing you want to do is have a love for the gospel. I'm going to tell a little secret about Pastor Bruce and myself. We didn't start proclaiming. When we were saved, we didn't the next day go out and head up. Bruce led the SBC the day after he was saved. No! The day after I was saved, did they put me in charge? The Calvinist Pope? No! What happened? What happened? Pastor Bruce sat as a hearer in the audience, like you, for years and years and years and years. And those years turned into what? Decades. Pastor Bruce sat under the teachings of faithful men. Learning, growing. It's the same story for me. Pastor Bruce and I are not in this pulpit because of ambition. Pastor Bruce is not running for SBC president. I'm not running for Calvinist Pope. Why are we behind this pulpit and you aren't up here? The answer is, friends, wait your turn. Decades after decades of being in the church. What has happened in Pastor Bruce's life? All of his seniors, all of the people he looked up to, all of the people he sat under as a disciple, what has happened to them? Pastor Bruce, what's happened to all of your mentors? They've gone home. They've gone on. I don't want to say all, there still are a couple of people. But the mentors have gone home. What does that leave for Pastor Bruce? Pastor Bruce is up here filling the spot because the spot needs to be filled and there's no one else who's gone through with the experience. It's the same thing for me. I'm not ambitious. I'm not using this pulpit as a stepping stone to the better thing. No. Friends, I'd love to be out in the audience listening to a much better pastor preach and give a sermon. But what happens is, what's the saying in Ecclesiastes? To everything there is a season, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to harvest, a time to gather rocks, a time to scatter rocks. Pastor Bruce sat as a very average Christian for decades. And now someone must step up. And so he answers the call. It's the same for me. What's happening here with Philip? Did Philip sit at home and develop a leadership strategy? I see this. I see this in church. I see pastors becoming successful coaches, successful CEOs, What does it mean to be the pastor of your church? Well, it's kind of like being the CEO of a company. I get together and I want to motivate people. I want to create a career plan for them. Then we have some programs of executive growth where we try to grow them towards executive status. Other people are like, well, I'm kind of like the football coach of my church. I want little Tommy to carry the ball today, and I want him to run this play where he zigs to the right, then he zags to the left, and then he goes and scores a touchdown. Little Tommy, good job, little Tommy. Is that the role of a pastor? No, friends. No. Philip is going to give us the role. What does Philip do? Verse 5. Philip went to the city of Samaria, told the people about the Messiah. Crowds listened intently to Philip. Why? Because they were eager to hear his message and see the miraculous signs he did. Many evil spirits were cast out, screaming as they left their victims. A lot of my charismatic friends talk about this example, this Philip. What should we do? Well, pastors should run around, go to their community, proclaim the gospel, perform a whole bunch of signs, and then God will be exalted. Friends, can I suggest another way of reading this? Who is doing the casting out of the spirits? Is it Philip? Well, in a way, he's the faithful proclaimer of the gospel. But who really is casting out those spirits? Who is making the hearts of those people in Judea and Samaria interested in what Philip has to say? Who's moving? Who's acting? What does John 3 say? The Spirit moves. Like what? Like the wind. It blows from here to there. Who tells the wind what to do? Nobody tells the wind what to do. So it is here. What is Philip doing? He's preaching into the wind, to use a metaphor. And the Spirit is bringing things to pass. Wow. What a beautiful situation we find ourselves in. There's more to come, friends. I hope you'll join me. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for these beautiful scriptures. Lord, everything about you is astonishing and high and lifted up. Everything about you is exalted and glorious. Lord, you are exalted and glorious when you bless us with things that we enjoy and like and receive gladly. But Lord, you are high and exalted and good, even if, like Stephen, his portion is not good from our perspective. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for guiding us. Thank you for choosing us. Please be with us, Lord, in this coming week. I pray for each person here. I pray for their blessing. I pray for their good. Be with them, Lord. Let them proclaim the Lord in goodness, and let your Spirit blow as the wind, as it pleases. Lord God, thank you for the honor of unpacking